I'm Ross Ford. I'm the executive officer for the Home Builders Association for Utah, and just doing our update for February 4th. It's our third week of the legislative session. Well, just because the way the legislative session goes, everything just progresses. So some of them we're going to talk about are we talked about last week and kind of update you. So first one is HB 48. It's the wildland interface modifications. Yeah. And what the intent is he was trying to put together a map for insurance companies to use so that we get more uniform fees. That's not so much our issue. Obviously, it is an issue for us personally, but from the home builder's position, what the deal was is we wanted to see what that map looks like because that could alter the interface itself. So I've met with the Division of Natural Resources. We've gone through the map. They've showed me how it works. They're still working on it, still trying to polish it up. It's obviously a work in progress. It's difficult to get everything. They're trying to bring in all the national data. Every time we have a fire like down in California, it will alter that data to a point. Some people are looking at it going, we didn't take this into account or whatever. So they're building a wildfire data map. Within it, they have the wildland interface data. So they're different. You can have a wildfire area that is mostly urban. We're looking at where we have kind of forest land meet with the city. And right now, that's a pretty bright line on their map. So we think it'll work. We watch it and we're really concerned about it because we have had fire officials in the past want to use that map to grab authority, and then they throw a blanket over an entire county, for example. We had happen in Wasatch County. The fire official just said, we're going to make the entire county a wildland urban interface area so we can require sprinklers in everything, which doesn't make sense and is really expensive. So we have to watch it, make sure that map works. Okay, so the next one is HB 58. It's the building inspector amendments. If you remember from last week, it's the one that legislative review committee that looks at licensing looked at. I went through committee this past week. It's moving. It made it through. The cities have a couple of concerns. I'm not sure they're valid concerns. They are in their minds, so we have to look at them. Is that part of the bill requires that there is a report submitted each year, and that will look at the building official and the building inspector's performance. And we talked about that last week. The cities are worried that that will be weaponized and be used to harm building inspectors and the building officials. Our response to that is there's no way to weaponize it. What it will do is shine daylight on those particular individuals. If there are some that are doing a bad job, it could feel like it's weaponized because it will show what they're doing. But that's the other one. The other big concern they have, and it seems like a legitimate concern, again, from their perspective, that they're saying we have lots and lots of little small towns, and these little jurisdictions within Utah. And because now there is a requirement that you have to have 6 years of experience, you have to be a licensed combination inspector in order to be the building official, they're saying, well, that's an undue burden on cities. Some of these small towns aren't going to be able to do it. Our argument back is, look, if you're going to give them authority to tell property owners what they can and can't do on their property and base it on the building code, then you have to have those basic requirements and qualifications to do it. Otherwise, it's just not fair. Lots of the smaller jurisdictions around the state already contract with the county, or multiple cities will get together and they will share a building official so they can do it. This is something that can be done. I don't think it's a good reason to hold the bill back. And at least for now, it's moving forward. But we do have to understand what their concerns are. So HB 88 is Representative Ray Ward's. Again, we talked about it last year. Mostly this just it puts external ADUs, allows that as an option in the urban areas. Again, we appreciate what Representative Ward is doing. He's a doctor by profession. This is not his area of expertise, but he sees that there's a housing problem. And so he's looking for, rather than this one great big fix, which a lot of people are, he sees that, no, there's a whole bunch of little fixes we should do. And if we get enough little fixes together, then we have the big fix. So this is one of them. The other one, and again, Ray Ward's, is HB 90, and it's a zoning one. Well, it started out as that in a residential area, you could do a 4,000 square foot lot. That has been amended now, and it's up to a 6,000 square foot lot so that you could do smaller lots. Again, it makes sense to him that we have lots of people that if we could have some of them, and in some areas it makes sense, and the developers are really good at figuring out where it makes sense because they have their money invested in it. So they'll figure out where it makes sense. They will put these smaller lots. They will be able to build them cheaper, and that solves one of the problems. One of the things I've heard, again, pushback from cities, is there's a concern that it also loops in anything that is a commercial zone would also be residential. By default, it would let it become residential. Their concern is we could take an old Kmart building that had been sitting vacant for years, and they could turn that piece of property into apartments. The cities are saying that's not a good idea because that piece of property was never had the infrastructure put into it to handle apartments. It was made to have the one or two bathrooms in a Kmart, not what would be in an apartment complex. I understand their argument. It's an acceptable point of view. The problem is most of what we build starts out on vacant land, and there's zero infrastructure in there. We're really good at putting that infrastructure in. It's just part of the deal. It's part of the planning process. It does need to be thought about. So the next one, this one seems to have triggered a lot of anxiety in a few people. It's kind of a minor issue for us, but because it stirred up so emotion, we'll talk about it real quick. It's HB 114 and architecture licensing. So this one's new this week. We didn't talk about it last week. So just real quick background. A long time ago, the architects put into statute that the term architect was a protected term. It could only be used in application with a licensed architect. And then to get licensed in Utah, you have to meet a certain amount of qualifications. And the architects have long since maintained that that's what separates them from, say, just a home designer, somebody who draws their own home. That they're saying, no, if you have an architect, and that word, again, becomes legally protected, an architect is somebody who has met those minimum requirements to do all of the things necessary for safety and design and everything that goes into a very well-planned building. Their argument holds true. It's good. This bill changes the definition of that a little bit. Over the years, that has morphed into the architect saying any part of that word or anything that sounds like that word is also protected. So if somebody says, well, no, I do architectural design, they say that sounds close enough to an architect, we won't allow you to do it. So this bill simply comes in and says, no, if you're an architect and you meet all of those professional requirements, you can use the term architect. But if any other language that is used that describes what somebody else may be doing is no longer protected. The architects put up a pretty good argument saying, no, it could put the public at risk. In the end, they said, no, to be able to say we use architectural design and words similar to that, or like on the Parade of Homes, where we will say the architectural design of this home was by, and say the person, that's going to become acceptable. So architects don't like it. I believe the home designers really like it. It did pass through committee. Moving along, we'll see where it goes. Again, a lot of passion behind this bill. HB 149, we talked about it last week, so we're not going to go real deep into it, but just real quick summary is it puts a restriction on selling a home to an institutional rental type agency. So that the idea is he's trying to protect that home ownership, and we understand that, and the value of a community and everything that happens with home ownership is obviously better when people own the home than when they rent. However, especially where we're, here in the valley where I'm sitting right now, we have Tech Ridge, and we have a lot of people that are those techie kind of people, and just the nature of their job, they move in and out of places all the time. They don't necessarily want to own a house. It doesn't work for their career path. They want to come in and have a really nice home in a really nice neighborhood, and for the most part, they want a hands-off approach. They want somebody doing all the yard work. At times, they even come in and the house is fully furnished. When they get a better job offer to go down to Silicon Valley or wherever it may be, they want to pack up their personal belongings and leave. They don't want to be burdened with a home. And that fits with their lifestyle. We shouldn't have the government stepping in and say, oh, no, you can't put that together in order to meet those needs. They need to have the whole subdivision doing that so that it's all maintained in an HOA kind of setting. The other thing is we just worry that in general, to have the government get in the middle of the contract, of any contract between two private individuals, usually turns out bad. Anytime the government has tried to control production, be it increase it or decrease it with anything other than incentives, usually turns out bad. It's not a good thing for government to be doing. So we had that conversation with Representative Clancy, and ultimately he understood what we're saying. He is still very dead set on trying to figure out a way to encourage homeownership. He sees the value of it, and we're with him on that concept, but he agreed this could be a problem, and at least for the moment has agreed to hold the bill. So another one, and again, we talked about it last week, is HB 151. Representative Galen Benyon has one, and hers would just require that if you put a home up for sale, it has to be reserved for somebody who will sign an affidavit that they're going to live in it. It will be owned and occupied by them for 30 days. So it holds up the sale. So all the reasons we've already talked about, it was a problem. This bill hasn't even been assigned to a standing committee yet. I don't know if it's going to just get held in rules. Again, her ambition is a good ambition. We understand where she's wanting to go, and it's not a bad idea. It's not necessarily the role of government that we believe, and apparently a lot of legislators agree with that. So right now it's in rules. may stay there for a while. Okay, another one from Representative Ward, and we haven't talked about this one. It's HB 175, and it's housing construction amendments. This one deals with the building code, and he started out with a really simple one line that changed the building code. That right now, if you go into the IRC, it says the IRC has regulatory authority over single family duplexes and townhouses. He simply wanted to add and threeplex or 3-unit structures and 4-unit structures. So he's saying we want to go up to a fourplex and be able to build it under the IRC. The IRC is a cheaper code to build in. The building officials immediately rallied against this and said, oh no, there's a ton of problems. The IRC doesn't define that well. There's all these other things that are not going to be able to fit into what's going to happen. And in their defense, some of the building officials were very helpful and said, no, you have some that are going to use a little piece of language somewhere in the code to stop this idea. And it's probably an okay idea. And so we worked on language, over the last week and came up with language that we believe will work. It sounds like it still needs to be refined a little bit. Provided a definition of what a triplex and a fourplex, what they are, so that they will fit into the code and say, here's how they're going to fit into the code. The building officials that are trying to be helpful and say, no, this is a good idea, it's a way to reduce costs, they said, no, there's still a couple of other little things we've got to fix. The bill moved through committee this past week and came out with a favorable recommendation. It will move forward with the understanding that we will continue to look at what those building officials said and make sure we get that language right. Again, Representative Ward is not really dead set on a specific agenda other than that grander agenda of how do we get more homes on the market cheaper. So he was more than open to hear any input, ideas, how do we make it work? So it was going through. And again, we appreciate Representative Ward coming from outside of the industry, but recognizing the problem and looking for anything he can do to help. HB 295 is municipal service fees and political subdivision. And we have not talked about this. This one was a really scary bill for us. Came in, gave cities the right to place a lien on any unpaid utilities. And it was drafted very, very broad. So it could be for almost anything. And kind of the one that jumps to my mind is we have some cities that bring in their own city internet service, and they'll bring it to the city and they will charge all residents of the city for developing and building out that infrastructure. So some residents may choose to never hook into that city fiber for a million different reasons, whatever. They just say, we're not going to do it. And so because of that, they may push back and say, I don't want to pay for any of it. I'm not hooking into it. I don't want to use it. I didn't agree to put it in, and I'm not going to pay that fee. Well, this bill would actually give the city the ability to place a lien on that person's home. So our concern was even bigger than that, is that we have fees that will come into dispute during the construction process. And we don't want the city, we want them to have to come to the table and let's debate and figure out why we think the fee is bad and why they think it's good. They may be right, they may be wrong. But if they don't even have to come to the table and have any kind of a negotiation, they could just slap a lien against the house, then they hold all the power and we cannot even have a negotiation process. So we sat in the meeting with the representative. We had an attorney from the league there and kind of hashed this out. And it got down to the representative saying, well, the problem is there are certain utilities that can't be turned off. We have no leverage to get payment on it. So obviously internet is not one of them, but what he specifically came down on is sewer and stormwater. Both of those are just a pipe. It's there. There's no way for them to shut that off. So we agreed if they would draft language that is narrow enough that that's the only thing we're talking about, that we probably would be okay with that. Representative Cutler seemed to think that was an okay idea, but the attorney from the league, he didn't appear to believe that that was a good idea and said he would have to take it back to his board and his, I forget what he calls it. There's a legislative policy committee that reviews this stuff. And before he could take a position, he would have to take it back to them. So we don't know how that will turn out. For right now, the bill's stalled, but it is one, the way it was drafted so broadly is very concerning to us. It needs to be narrow of what they want. The city can't just have blanket authority to throw liens on property. State construction electrical standards. We talked about it. This is the code amendment to bring in the 2023 National Electric Code. Nothing happened on it this last week just because of scheduling issues with the bill sponsor. It is just stalled sitting. Nobody's opposing this bill. All of the stakeholders have had a big voice in it. It's been discussed and worked on for many, many months. It should move through really, really easy once it gets started. It just needs to get started. And again, just a scheduling issue that caused us a problem. Okay, HB 320 is Municipal Ordinance Amendment from Lisa Shepherd. And so I'm not sure where it is. It's kind of stalled out. We worry about this because this bill gives this city the ability to escalate some sort of a fine that you're not coming in compliance in. So if you're doing, and where I think the bill was meant, and I don't know this for sure, but in my mind, where it was meant is if you're somebody who has a piece of property and you won't mow the weeds down, you don't take care of things, and the city enforcement officer comes and says, look, you got to take care of these weeds, and you don't, their answer is to give you a fine. If they don't believe that fine is getting to the answer, getting to the problem, they can give you another fine, but at times people still ignore it. And so this gave them the ability to escalate that fine to a misdemeanor. And so it all of a sudden gets a lot more of a threat, and we believe it will get those people thereafter to perform. The problem is again, the way it was written, it looped in everything. It looped in everything to do with construction. So if you happen to be somebody that there was a mix up in scheduling and you believe the building inspector showed up a day early or showed up at the wrong time or showed up at the wrong unit, and you say, no, we have to reschedule this inspection. And because of that, they give you a reinspection fee. This would loop that in there. It could be that fee could be elevated to give you a criminal type approach on it. Same thing with the stormwater fee or any of the fees you get, that at times things just get mixed up. The building process is complicated and difficult, as you all know, and sometimes things get missed and we get reminded with a fee, and we hate them, but we get them and we understand it and we deal with it. But to have it to turn into some sort of a criminal offense is not fair, and we don't believe that was the intent of the bill. But nonetheless, we have to work with it and see. So we have asked if we can have construction pulled out of the bill, if we can carve that out. We believe that's what the intent of the bill is. But at this point, it's still in rules. It's not moving, so we don't know. We'll see where it is. Senate Bill 58 is a mobile crane bill, and Senator Cal Musselman is doing it. This bill did get through committee this past week. Interesting bill. And again, we talked about it last week, so we don't want to spend a lot of time on it. It's been 2 years in the making. It's to protect really, really big, heavy cranes picking up really heavy loads on less than ideal soil conditions, and the crane tipping over, sinking, whatever should happen. The idea is if you have a crane that's that big and you're lifting loads that heavy, you would need to do geotesting to make sure you have a solid foundation. We pushed back really hard on it. Again, we talked about it last week because the problem is the way they wrote the bill. It looped in everything we do. It looped in our little cranes we set trusses with. It even originally was so broad that it would take a skid steer or a backhoe or anything. It certainly would take stocking trucks. If you were there stocking sheetrock or shingles on the roof, it would include those. We said we just can't have residential in it. We don't lift anything so heavy that we will break through that earth's crust. We know, we set the cranes on pads. It's not a big deal. So what they did, and originally they said, no, we're going to take residential out. We're going to make the crane size bigger. They didn't do either of those things, but what they did do is say that it only applies to tilt-ups. So in general function, it takes us out. We don't really do tilt-ups for residential, so we're out of it. It passed through, and we're just neutral. We didn't speak for it. We didn't speak against it. They pulled us out. They asked what we did. We're still going to watch it because it could loop us back in if somebody made an amendment or something. There was one thing that was in it that was a little bit troubling. The bill ended with a line that says, if you don't do what's in this bill, then there will be a presumption the owner was negligent, which I'm obviously no attorney and don't understand it, but the presumption that they were negligent kind of sounds like the opposite of how we do things. Usually it's innocent until proven guilty. This sounds like, well, we're going to assume you're guilty unless somehow you can prove you were innocent. That's been discussed. It sounds like they're going to amend that out, and I hope they do, because that was troubling language for me. So we'll see. But it sounds like they will put an amendment forward on the floor and just remove that language. SB 86 is Workplace Protection Amendments from Senator Jen Plum, and we talked about it last week. This is one that changes the anti-discrimination. There are certain thresholds you hit. Right now they're 15, and then when you hit 50, it goes to even a bigger threshold. But this would remove the threshold from 15, and it takes it down to 5. We have a huge problem with that because in order to meet all of those anti-discrimination things, what's required in the training and the administration of getting that done is huge. It would mean these little companies with 3 to 5 employees would almost have to hire a full-time HR person or do all of their HR through some sort of contracted. organization, but it would definitely raise the cost. It is definitely an added burden. And as we just look at our membership, and we have lots of those little small companies, there's not a lot of these problems. We don't see a lot of the complaints. We don't see this as a huge issue. They all know each other. They work together. They're friends. We don't see a ton of it. Not that it doesn't happen, and not that we don't take it serious. But nothing happened on it this last week. However, it is in committee today. We'll see. My assumption is the entire business community will come out and oppose this, because it is a fairly significant administrative burden. But we'll see what today brings. Watch TikToks. I'll try and give a report on it. Last one, Senate Bill 152, local land use regulations. And we talked about it last week. This is the one where a few years ago we put in place a whole list of architectural requirements, what we believe are architectural standards, and then told the cities they couldn't regulate. The cities were regulating what the grids look like on your windows, what color your front door is, what color you paint your house, whether you have a front porch or not. Just a whole host of things that didn't seem like it made sense for a city to be doing it. So all those were captured in a list, and just the city said you can't do them. This bill simply added garages to that list. So the city wouldn't be able to regulate whether or not you're going to have a garage. Or we have one builder that has a bunch of plans that they've used over and over and over again, and people really, really like them. And they went to Eagle Mountain, and Eagle Mountain says, well, our garage requires this. Well, a lot of the people who build these particular homes love a third car garage. It's an add-on, it's an extra. But when they do it, in order to fit on the lots that are already there, it's already done on a lot of these lots, the garage needs to be just a couple of inches smaller to meet all the setbacks. The city says, no, here's our requirement for a garage. That's what you got to do. So now this fairly popular models of home can't be used with a 3-car garage add-on unless they redraw and figure out how to do something different to meet that requirement. This just says you can't do that. The bill sponsor, there's some other bills that deal with garages and what will be allowed and what won't. We assume that some of those, the league got with this guy and some of the other sponsors and says, look, we have some other language that may be a little bit more eloquent, may address this better. And so he just held his bill in committee. So I assume it's kind of dead at this point for him to hold it. He can always bring it back, but there's a reason he chose to hold the bill, and I assume that's what it is. So that's kind of the update. There are still more bills going. Obviously, each week this is going to get more and more and more till we get to the end, and I'll keep you working on it again. Hopefully, as these bills happen and come out of committees, I'll give you short little, minute and a half kind of summaries of what happened in the committee if you want to watch those a little bit quicker information. Thank you.